Welcome back to the Billy Meier Books YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the value of empathy, and I'm here, Mike Whelan, along with Vivienne to talk about that. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand the feelings of another person. This involves imagining what it would be like to be in someone else's situation, to imagine their stress, to imagine their insecurities, to imagine their trials and tribulations in life. And this imagination of what the other person might be going through is the definition of empathy. So, Vivienne, do you want to talk a little bit about the value of empathy?
So obviously, we have a situation on this planet where we're badly lacking in empathy. And I think this is largely, well, to a large degree, it's because we are trying to protect ourselves from feeling the pain of all the horrible things that are going on. That's one reason. But it's also the cause for why so many things are going on that are so horrible, that we can just not feel it when we are aware that people in various war zones are just getting killed left, right and centre. And even on a more personal front, when people around us are so frequently in bad states, suffering in different ways. We find it too much and we close ourselves off. But that very closing off is also the thing that's continuing their suffering more. I can think of I like to think of simple examples in my own life just because they're easy to relate to. When I go for a drive to the shops or to work, there's always a few animal carcasses on the road because we have these lovely little wallabies that bounce over the road and cars hit them. There's so many of them where we are because we're in a forested area. And just so that you don't get distressed every time you go out, you sort of switch off. You go, yeah, there's another carcass, and you just can't hurt for the creature every time. Otherwise you're too unhappy and too distressed. But I notice this in myself and I think, are you becoming hard-hearted? This is awful. And so I deliberately recently made myself feel it. Just be aware. Don't put the wall up. Be aware what happened, how it might have been for the animal. And then I just want to cry every time I go out. So you can see how it happens, but it also means that I'll be more careless. If I'm not really thinking, what about the animals? Then I might hit one too, driving more faster than I really need to. Mm-hmm. So there we are. But the good news is, and this is the thing I just love about this teaching, is there are concrete ways of growing our empathy. It's not just a vague thing, how do we, God will make me more empathetic. It's sort of, the self-responsibility teaching we were talking about. If I pray to God, God will make me more this and more that. Well, no, we can do it, and it's not a vague process. We simply have to pay more attention. So if I want to understand better about who you are, what you feel, what you're thinking, what your emotions are, I simply need to make you the object of my meditation. I meditate on you, obviously not in an invasive way, but such that I'm actually noticing. Because one of the problems that we have is we're not in the habit of paying attention to reality in any form, because we accept indoctrination, because we accept, outer instruction on how to think. So we're not doing it for ourselves, at which point we don't notice what the other person is feeling. We don't look at the expression on their face. We don't remember what they said. We don't hear the tone in their voice. But if you can simply practice that, then you get good at it. And that's the good news, and that's what I love about this teaching so much. That we practice things like it's acceptable in our culture that you go to the gym and you get fit and you say to your friend, hey Joe, you're looking really good. You've been working out? And he says, yeah, I've been doing 20 minutes every morning at the gym. but we never say to each other, hey, you're getting really empathetic. Have you been working out? You say, yes, every morning I practice empathy for 10 minutes. Why don't we do that? We can do it with the same discipline that we apply to, I developed this muscle, and why don't we do it to empathy and love and all those good things,
I have a story I'll tell you about myself. I've recently wondered if as I've grown older, have I become less empathetic? And my thought process along that, I'm still working through that and stuff. My thought process was, I've been through so much. I've been through a lot of tough life. I dropped out of high school. I didn't finish, and so I've sort of had a rough life. And I had parents that raised me, religiously. And that was a challenge. We have another video on how our religious background is. So I think that I've come so far, and I've overcome so many challenges in life, and a lot of people do. But from my standpoint, I've come through so many challenges. I've triumphed so much. Sometimes I think, well, I've done this. Why can't the next person do it? That's where my thinking goes. I know it's not right, but so I think that diminishes my ability to have empathy. That's what I've noticed within myself. I'm not saying it's right or anything, but I'm trying to correct that. That I sometimes think, well, I've done this and I've done that. This is so simple. Why can't you do it? That's what I think in my mind. That's why I think as I've gotten older, and I look back, I've had less empathy, which I have to change that. That's one aspect that I work on. The other aspect is I have a small business and I have some employees. So, we're trying to complete a project or we have some deadlines or something and somebody's out sick, so that also gives me the ability to empathize with my employees to say, okay, well, the baby's sick, he needs to take some time off, or that type of thing. So I do get some positive reinforcement from that way, that I can sort of practice empathy from that standpoint. But it's interesting. I think as I've gotten older, I've become less empathetic, and I'm trying to change that. But that's what I've noticed within myself.
Well, that may be, as we were talking before about, so much trouble is going on in the world. It's sort of a way of protecting ourselves, which isn't good, but I think it's one of the reasons we do it. So it could be the case for many of us. But you touch on something important there in regards to what other people can manage to do. Now, one of the positive spin-offs of becoming more empathetic is that we're better able to judge whether somebody else can, for instance, cope with hearing about what Billy Meier has to tell us. We think, well, I can understand, I can cope with that. Why can't you? This is great information. You should be able to appreciate its greatness.
Yeah.
But we do that without observing that person and trying to appreciate, by the way they talk and act, where their world of thoughts is at. Their world of thoughts is based on a whole range of different experiences than our own. So we don't know what they can handle, what it's able to take on. The information's got to be sufficiently consistent with where their thoughts are already at for that to be something that they can cope with. And that touches on the whole thing about the psyche, which we will address later, that, you need to respect the other person's psychical need to not be forced to take on information they can't handle. But how do you know? How can you make that judgment and not say too much or not say too little about Billy's teaching? It's by getting better at just studying where another person's at. Mm-hmm. Just learn through doing.
Yes.
I think that's a simple answer.
Sometimes when somebody gets mad, so if a customer's mad or somebody I encounter with just in normal life is mad, I've started to make the internal practice to say, I wonder how his day went today. I wonder, what his finances are like. I wonder what his relationship is like. I try to think, what's this person gone through recently that's made him this way, that's made him this angry or whatever it may be. I've tried to do that, and it's helped a lot. It's helped me to say, okay, I don't know what's going on, but I try to think, what could he be going through as a human being? And that's sort of the internal thought process I've done. And boy, it keeps me from reacting. If someone's mad, to get right back and be mad back again.
Be defensive.
Yeah, be defensive and then escalate the situation. And just by having a little bit of empathy, a little bit of just try to figure out why this person is behaving this way. Maybe he's had a bad day, maybe he just crashed his car, maybe who knows what it is. But that's helped. It helps steer my reaction or my way to deal with the person in a more positive way than it would in a reactive way if I would have just said, "Well, what are you talking about?" That type of thing. So
yeah,
that's one thing I've done with it myself.
I think it's really also important to distinguish, as Billy does in his teaching, between empathy and pity. And I'd really like to read a little bit from the Way to Live about that,
Sure,
if that's okay.
Yep.
That it's easy when people sort of think fairly superficially about empathy to think it's just, oh, poor thing, taking on somebody else's misery, basically, which is really what pity is. So this is particularly relevant, this section. So it's number 478 for anyone who's got the book and wants to read it. Having feelings for others, what is that actually? It is not only a feeling of care and of sympathy for a suffering fellow human being or any plant or animal, nor is it simply warmth of the heart or a sheer recognition of the hardship and needs of human beings, animals or plants. Truthfully, it is a co-living with the human beings, animals and plants, in love, without wrongly created feelings and emotions, rather in the truth of oneself co-living and coexisting in everything, which is the definition of love. From that there comes a never-diminishing decisiveness to undertake everything possible and necessary in order to alleviate the arising suffering of other human beings or any creatures and so forth, and that emerges out of the feeling of the co-living and co-feeling, which is therefore enormously different to pity, which the human being creates in, I'll say, herself. We say himself, herself in these texts to be equal, but it's a bit unwieldy. I'll say herself, for fellow human beings or any creatures, and consequently suffers from herself. In this self-suffering form, there arises a self-created wrong feeling directed at fellow human beings or any creatures and so forth, in which one co-experiences the participation in the suffering of others, from which there also arises the readiness to give help. And then he goes on to explain how there are aid organisations that basically base their activity on pity, on co-living the suffering of someone else for the sake of appeasing their own consciousnesses. So that's quite a hard-hitting appraisal that he makes. But I think, if we're honest, a lot of us have done that, and that's the thing that's definitely encouraged by the church. Those poor people, will give them help, poor people, and then you feel supposed to feel good about yourself, Mm-hmm. But empathy is far more complete than just taking on some. It's of no use to just take on somebody else's suffering. Perceive it, understand it, and also understand that they're much more than just their suffering. They are also a being who has self-responsibility for their own thoughts, feelings, and actions. They have that power to actually change their circumstances. So it's important to understand all those aspects of a human being, not just the particular suffering they have. You also, of course, have to take into consideration that they may not have learnt how to use that, may not be aware of it. But it's the whole picture, isn't it? It's
Mm-hmm.
the whole picture, not just the suffering. It's the deeper part of the person who's sort of beyond the suffering, the love-based, fine spiritual perception, all that. With this whole package, it has to be understood.
How could someone learn on whether what they're feeling is pity or empathy? What would be a good way to distinguish that for our viewers? And
I guess if all they feel is the sadness. All they feel is the hurt of somebody else. If that's all they're getting, I would say that that's pity.
Pity.
Yeah. It's not. I don't think Billy's saying in these explanations that you should not feel. I mean, he does say somewhere, there is an article that says sadness is not a good thing. It's sort of a self-indulgent thing. He's not saying you shouldn't be able to perceive somebody else's loss and so forth and have feelings for them about that. But it needs to be done in a neutral, positive way, just to understand the facts of the matter. And then you're in a position to actually do something appropriate. If you're not perceiving it appropriately, and you're perceiving it in a negative way, then you're not going to be in a position to perceive a real and effective response to somebody else's needs. I find that a useful way of thinking about it.
I see. Okay, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. So, but how to do it? I come up with the same answer for everything. I'm sure I'm going to become a real bore.
No.
How to develop your empathy? Meditate on the reality of the other person. You have meditation objects. You might meditate on a glass, a crystal, a flower, the quietness of your own consciousness. But to gain empathy over somebody else directly, to me, I find the most useful way is just to use them as my meditation object and just perceive without the prejudices and biases of your own thinking.
That's difficult.
Right. Difficult,
Yeah.
but that's the goals. And it's a concentration exercise. There's no magic in it. There's no mystery. It's as simple as being disciplined. And just as soon as you have an intrusive thought that starts to interpret what that person is rather than perceive what that person is, you simply gently correct yourself and say, what is that person? And just let yourself be
Back to the
told
empathy.
by the perception that's not interrupted by your prejudices and your distracting thoughts.
That's very valuable. That's a very valuable explanation.
To my mind, that's a solution to everything. Attentiveness, that's what we're not taught by our religions. We're taught not to be attentive. So attentiveness in every context is the answer to getting a truthful information that informs us in our actions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that basically sums it up.
Okay. Good. All right. I think we've covered a good amount of the value of empathy. Thank you for joining Vivienne Legge and Mike Whelan on the Billy Meier Books YouTube channel, and we'll see you in the next topic.